And welcome to episode 66 of the Drunken Boxing Podcast. Now, it's been quite a few months since our last episode, which was episode 65 with Nick Grayson. If you haven't heard that one, go and have a listen. It's also a very interesting discussion with a pioneer in his own right within the Chinese martial arts environment in the USA. A lot has happened in terms of releases on our YouTube channel, etc. since then, so I'm not going to cover all of them. If you haven't been following, go on over to Mushin Martial Culture on YouTube. Take a look at all of the content we've released. There's quite a lot of content. One of the key things that I have been releasing, as many of you have known, is the Secrets of Xingyi Trend series, and just recently I released episode 10. There's probably 2 episodes left of the main series, but a couple of months ago, along with the famous Jarek Szymanski, as well as John Nicklin, we released the Secrets of Xingyi Trend Redux Episode 1. In it, we cover the first 3 episodes of the series and discuss aspects that were raised in the series, whether confirming or looking into them, or even outright disagreeing with some of the content that was presented in the series to take a closer look at the history of the art of Xingyi Trend. So that's going to be continuing. We're going to be recording Episode 2 shortly after New Year, so keep an eye out for that. I've also released some discussions by Master Di Guoyong, which I recorded last year when he was back in Beijing, and I had quite a bit of things that I wanted to ask him and film him answering, and I started releasing some of them. A lot of it is only for the Huajin online learning program, but there's some that I released publicly on the YouTube channel. Topics about Xingyi Trend, about Baguazhang, about training as a whole. Quite interesting if you're interested in these topics to go take a look at. And as mentioned, this is all part of the Huajin online learning program where we have monthly discussion videos or theory videos, etc., in addition to the technical videos that are released on the program itself. And in this case, they came from Master Di Guoyong himself directly. I still have quite a bit of those filmed discussions to release with him. Some of them were formal, some of them informally when I was training with him last year, which was a great time, as always. And I think many of you will find those interesting. So keep an eye out for all of these that have been released and that will be released in the future. In terms of merchandise, I actually got inspired over to create the Elemental Things t-shirt and hoodies, which is based on a certain popular sci-fi series, as you all know. Inspired by that, I decided to make a t-shirt that was Xingyi themed with striking design. You know, I've always tried to make interesting shirts that promote the Chinese martial arts, interesting hoodies, interesting apparels, not just your standard yin-yang and a shadow movement. Try to make something that you'd wear not just in training, but wear casually too, because you like it and you want to represent the art. So if you're interested in getting any of the apparel that we've released, go on over to mushinmartialculture.com and you can visit our online store. Of course, we also have my books, as well as weaponry and other training equipment, training shoes, etc. Go take a look. All right, let's get right into today's episode. My guest today is Sifu Alex Richter. He is a Wing Chun specialist who some of you might be aware of. He runs a great YouTube channel called The Kung Fu Genius, which also has a podcast. It's a wonderful channel, a wonderful resource. And he's also runs one of the biggest, well, if not the biggest, Wing Chun organization in New York called City Wing Chun. He comes from the Liang Ting lineage of Wing Chun. He studied in Germany. He's got an extensive history in the art of Wing Chun, both as a practitioner as well as a researcher. And that's what struck me most about our discussion, is that he's down to earth, practical, logical, reasonable, and realistic in both his training, but as well as his approach to history, the method that you would do investigation into history, and also the logical mind that you need to apply when looking at these topics. So the discussion I've thoroughly enjoyed. He's the type of guest that really, I enjoy talking to. I had a bunch of questions that I wanted to ask him about the art itself and its history, but we also spoke about martial arts in general, and he's the kind of guy that I think we could go into a lot deeper on the subject of Wing Chun and its history, as well as martial arts in general. So possibly in the future I'll set up something that's more Wing Chun themed. Maybe it'll be an in discussion with a couple of different Wing Chun people, and we could discuss specific Wing Chun related topics. I mean, it's such a well-known martial art, but once again, as with most of Chinese martial arts, the history is a little bit muddy. We can extract ideas using logic as well as looking up evidence and applying our minds to it to discuss certain aspects. Of course, not everything can be discovered, but I think it's a great topic that is very interesting. All that aside, I really enjoyed this podcast and I hope you do too. So here is my guest, Alex Richter. And welcome to the Drunken Boxing Podcast. I'm honored today to be talking to Sifu Alex Richter, also known as the Kung Fu Genius. I think it's the other way around. I think he's the Kung Fu Genius known as Alex Richter. But yeah, I'm very happy to finally have this opportunity to talk to you. We've been trying to set this up for a while, but we finally got it done. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Byron. I'm very excited about this.
Yeah, me too. Likewise. You know, actually, you were suggested by Randall from you were on his podcast as well.
Yeah, Kung Fu Conversations.
Exactly. And I
Awesome.
thought, it's probably a good idea to have a few Wing Chun guests on. I haven't had, I might have had one in the past, but it would be really good to get somebody as deep in the weeds, as they say, with Wing Chun as you are, to get a conversation and to get some discussion about Wing Chun, which is such a popular martial art. So I'm glad.
Well, I hope I don't disappoint. So
You definitely won't.
I'm ready.
Do you want to give a little bit of a background of yourself for the listeners that don't know you?
Sure. So I grew up here on the East Coast of the United States. So I grew up in New Jersey, very close to New York. So I'm kind of an East Coaster at heart. Started martial arts when I was 8 years old with karate. Classic story of being bullied by a neighbor, getting punched in the face, and then asking my mom to take me for karate lessons. And I took the karate lessons, and then at some point that bully joined, and then we actually became friends. So a little bit, I suppose, like the Cobra Kai. And then so that started a fascination with martial arts for me. And I think about a year into my karate training, my father brought home Enter the Dragon with Bruce Lee. And the moment I saw Bruce Lee, Chinese martial arts, Bruce Lee in particular, but Chinese martial arts in general was then very much top of mind for me. The problem was, outside of watching Kung Fu movies on Saturdays, in Central Jersey, there are no Hung Gar, Wing Chun, Kung Fu schools anywhere. You have to go east of the city, and there was no way my mom was going to take me into New York City to learn Kung Fu in the 80s. That was a very different time for New York then.
Sure.
And then I eventually continued with Taekwondo. I got my junior black belt at 15, and we moved to Seattle during that time when I was going to high school, and I actually found a Wing Chun school. And it was not a traditional Wing Chun school, but rather a non-classical Wing Chun lineage, which actually came from Bruce Lee's early students in Seattle. So not only was I learning quote unquote Kung Fu, but I was also learning like a variant that came through Bruce Lee. So that kind of sparked my fascination with Wing Chun and Bruce Lee's methods as well. And eventually by the late 90s, I had settled on learning Wing Chun because I really wanted to learn a classical version of the art. And that's pretty much what I've been doing ever since. Since 2002, I opened my school, City Wing Chun in New York City. So yes, I've been teaching Wing Chun now for 23 years, and I love it. And a couple of years ago, I started a podcast. I had an older podcast called Dudes of Kung Fu with my late friend, Big Sean Madigan, and that was mainly Wing Chun and Jeet Kune Do. And then after he passed, I created a more kind of a slightly less serious podcast called The Kung Fu Genius, which is my nickname, for better or worse. And that's what I've been doing on top of teaching and writing books and things like that. So.
Well, I mean, the moniker stuck because I didn't know if I should call you Mr. Richter or Mr. Genius. So it's good. When you just pedaling back a little bit, when you did, you said you did Taekwondo growing up. Was it ITF or WTF?
It was WTF, yeah.
Okay. What do you, in hindsight, what are your feelings about, it has changed over the years, but...
Yeah, so when I was learning WTF, which is funny now because of what WTF generally stands for in NetSpeak, so I did WTF, right? And at that time, it was the beginning of the introduction of Taekwondo into the Olympics. I think the first one was in '88 for the Seoul Olympics. And when I was training, there was the late 80s, early 90s, and it was still, I suppose, what you would consider the more old school WTF. And we still, for example, learned how to punch.
Right.
And But when I now watch Olympic Taekwondo, which is from the WTF, I watched the last Olympics and I could not recognize it as what I had learned back then. It became this really strange kind of, kick jabbing kind of style.
Tag with your feet.
Yes, and it did not. I mean, and I have a black belt from that organization. My name is in the Cookie One headquarters over there in Seoul. And I was watching that, and I said, "This is not what I did." So, yeah, it's strange to see what it's changed to. But I definitely am very thankful for having all those years of Taekwondo, especially at the hands of some pretty serious Korean instructors. And so I can still kick high and I can still do all that stuff, which has helped me in Wing Chun. And it's also helped me be a good training partner for my students when they're learning to fight against kicks. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, like people look down on Olympic Taekwondo today, but they forget its roots and where it actually came from. I'm sure you've read the book A Killing Art by Alex Gillis. Have you heard of this book?
So actually, one of my good friends, who's also a Taekwondo aficionado, he's the Taekwondo genius. He recommended that book to me. And so it's on my reading list. So I am aware of it. I just haven't got to it yet.
You're going to love it.
A pretty extensive reading list. He told me a little bit about it. So I'm looking very much forward to learning more about that history.
Well, for the listeners out there, it's a book that, I mean, it goes deep into the uncovering the true history of Taekwondo, where it came from General Choi, down to the political changes, even down to assassinations that trained Taekwondo people were doing. I mean, that's why I say, like, people shouldn't look down on it. I mean, these guys could kill with their hands back in the day. The difference is the Olympic direction, and that's the key point here. So, I mean, I personally, I was involved in the official movement working for Chinese martial arts, and I've seen what standardization and that goal does to an art. So it was no surprise to me what was going on and where it's going and where it continues to go today. So, but, that's why I think it makes us appreciate and drive or gravitate more to the traditional arts, which are they're multifaceted. So they're not a single thing, but they're grounded. And that's, for me, what's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and as an aside, Jigoro Kano, the founder of judo, said that the moment judo had weight classes and became a sport would be the death of judo. And it's also an Olympic sport. Yeah. So to a certain degree, that even Olympic judo is contrary to the wishes and the idea of its founder as well. So I think that this is probably a common problem for arts that transition into sports.
Yeah, I think judo did a better job, actually, even though it was the first Asian martial art that entered Asian sport in general, that entered the Olympics, and it did so early. I think in general, all things considered, it's done a better job than a lot of other sports martial arts have.
For sure.
But it's always gonna have its downside, for sure.
Yes,
I mean, that's definitely it. Now, your background in your training, I mean, you've trained with a lot of different teachers, and you mentioned that you had decided after training with this non-classical derivative that came through Bruce Lee's original students, you decided to follow a specific path. Why did you choose that specific lineage and direction for your Wing Chun training?
That's a really great question. It's always difficult to totally understand one's motives, especially in a past time, because I don't know how much I'm projecting stuff in hindsight, as opposed to what my real motives were back then. But for me, I had this dual interest of both a functional martial art that was practical for defending yourself if you were attacked on the street. Having done sport martial arts as a child, not just Taekwondo, but even in my teen years, I did a little bit of kickboxing. I and I even did a sport jiu-jitsu tournament when I was 18. I feel that I got the sports stuff out of me. So I didn't have the desire as I became older to get into sports stuff. I kind of felt that I had done it already. And I wanted a functional martial art for, real practical use on the street. But at the same time, I also caught the fever for the aesthetic of Chinese martial arts. And that was for sure, largely due to watching those Shaw Brothers movies every Saturday. We had here in the New York, New Jersey area on Saturdays in the afternoon, they had what was called Black Belt Theater, and they would show usually a Shaw Brothers film. Sometimes it would be another small production company dubbed horribly into English. And so I think my first Kung Fu film, which is consequently also my favorite one, is Heroes of the East, which is a Shaw Brothers film. It's fantastic. It's a film that has no death. The Japanese are not depicted as bad guys. It's about this fair exchange between Chinese and Japanese martial arts, and having done karate, having a love for Chinese martial arts. It was like the best first Kung Fu movie to watch. And then so there was an aesthetic about the Chinese styles that I felt the like Japanese martial arts didn't quite have. And so I always wanted to have the traditional martial art, but also something that was functional. And so the non-classical derivative gave me the functional part, but it kind of had knocked away most of the aesthetic portion. And also they didn't do things like the traditional Wing Chun forms or some of the traditional exercises. And I'm kind of a completist. So I wanted to know, okay, so what is the classical program? But I had to find a classical stream of Wing Chun, which also had some teeth in it. And through my research, that came to be the Leung Ting lineage, which had at that time, a very good fighting reputation in Europe. And so that seemed to fit the bill for me. So that's why I switched over to a kind of more traditional art. But Leung Ting Wing Chun, unlike some of the other derivatives, is a fair more quite progressive, but that's compared to the other Wing Chun styles. So it fit the bill, both having, learning forms and learning the traditional exercises, but then also having something that was practical and functional. That's why that really fit the bill for me, because I had both of those aspects.
Step into another dimension of internal power. Our Elemental Things tees and hoodies feature striking Xingyi Quan themed imagery inspired by the dark, neon-lit mystery and retro atmosphere of a certain well-known supernatural TV universe, but reinvented through the lens of Chinese martial arts. Bengquan Vecna back to the upside down by grabbing yours today at mushinmartialculture.com. Order now. Oh, that's interesting. I mean, I think you're touching on the topic of the aesthetics. It's also a type of fluidity and motion, a whole body coordination, these type of things that I think attracts. I mean, it definitely attracted me to the Chinese martial arts when I was younger. I also started with Japanese arts when I was younger, and so I think that definitely does. And who knows if it's in the movies, it's a lot more exaggerated, but it definitely hooked us, I think, even subconsciously when we were growing up watching Chinese martial arts movies, because something just jumped out at you that was just like, wait, I've seen martial art movies before, but there's something different here, and you get bitten by that bug. So where did your path take you to? Which teacher when you were going down that, and how did you go into the training and etc.?
So I had heard about Leung Ting Wing Chun. Leung Ting Wing Chun had kind of a reputation of being rebel rousers and troublemakers in terms of starting trouble with the other Wing Chun lineages, which as a teenager I was like, cool. Those sound like the guys I want to align myself with. As they always say, be careful what you wish for, right?
Yeah.
And then in Germany, Leung Ting Wing Chun was quite established through the efforts of my late Sifu, Keith Kanspeck. They had huge organizations, schools everywhere. So I'm half German. My father's German. And so on a visit to Germany to see family, I went to the local magazine shop, picked up a local martial arts magazine or a German martial arts magazine, and saw the ad for Leung Ting Wing Chun, and saw that they were quite literally hundreds of schools just in Germany, and that they had some representation in the U.S., but it wasn't nearly to the level of Germany or Europe. So when I went back to the States, I had my dad order me a couple of the German Wing Chun books. I couldn't speak German at that time, but I found those books fascinating. I basically read them with a German word book next to it. And I was so into it, I basically taught myself German mostly through reading those
Oh, that's
books.
very cool.
And and then I thought, wow, this the way the Wing Chun was presented, although it was traditional classical Wing Chun with the forms and the dummy and the weapons and everything, it was still very pragmatic. The my Sifu's book talked about the issues of dealing with wrestlers and boxers, and these were not topics that were normally discussed by other Wing Chun people. They would normally be very dismissive of the problems of boxers and wrestlers, and having done a little bit of grappling myself and a little bit of boxing, I knew very well that this was a problem for a lot of traditional martial arts. And here was a Wing Chun person who was addressing that quite openly. So I thought it really kind of fit for me. The only problem was back in Seattle, there were no WT schools. The closest one was in Vancouver, Canada, which was about a 3-hour drive. Depending on how I drove, sometimes I'd make it in 2.5 hours. So
Oh, wow.
I found a WT instructor there who consequently was also from Germany, had learned in the big organization, and went up there, took my first private lesson with him, and he was the first Wing Chun guy that was just like, okay, well, he seemed somewhat unimpressed by my resume of having a black belt and having learned all this other stuff. And then he's like, okay, well, we'll just fire a punch at me and then I'll show you how Wing Chun works. And I was thinking like he didn't look very impressive, and I'm thinking like, okay, it's like I'm just gonna fire an easy punch at him, and I fired an easy punch at him, and he just looked at me. He's like, no, like come at me, like he was
Attack
almost
me,
insulted
yeah.
that I had gone easy on him, and then so I came in and actually wanted to give him a kick instead to surprise him, and before I had even had a chance to lift my leg up, he stepped in. His hand was on my face, and he had launched me against the wall, and there was no kick forthcoming after that. So
Right.
I was like, wow, the fact that he did not really look physically impressive was very impressive to me. And then I was hooked. But going up to Vancouver as a broke teenager was not the easiest thing for me to do. So eventually I saved up a bunch of money and moved to Germany to train at the headquarters there, a castle called Langensalk Castle, where you could train five days a week, 6 hours a day, and do nothing but Wing Chun and
Wow.
become like an assistant trainer. So I basically told my parents, like, I don't really want to go to college. I don't want to go to university. I kind of want to go to Germany and study Kung Fu in a castle.
Oh, cool.
And so
They must have
that
been
ended.
impressed.
Yeah, they were. Well, I think they were worried because I wasn't showing much direction in terms of academics. So I was ready to go to like a local college, but my heart wasn't in it. And then when they found that there was something that I wanted to do, I think they were like, okay, well maybe he'll just do it for a short time, and then he'll get on to the business of getting serious about his life. But as it turns out, I went trained full-time for 3 years, became a junior instructor, moved back to the East Coast, opened a school in New York, and I have not had a real job since.
Well, I mean, if you make your passion your job, you never work a day, is what they say.
Absolutely. That's
Yeah.
totally true.
But I mean, it's very similar to me as well. It sounds like your parents were as supportive as mine, that my mom allowed me to go and just, all right, you want to move into the Kung Fu school and train? I mean, that's your choice, but go do it if you want to do it. So very similar, but that's great.
Yeah, that's
And
great.
you've studied since then with many of the big names in Wing Chun throughout the years. That was by design, or was it did you seek these people out, or was it by opportunity?
So when, as a teenager reading the martial art magazines and knowing a little bit about who's who, I would have never thought, I would be able to learn privately or even in a group seminar with Sifu Alex Richter or any of these names that I later ended up knowing quite personally. But I always feel that I have the luck of Forrest Gump, in that I always seem to be like in the right place at the right time when either something major is going on in the Wing Chun world, or there's someone very important and I happen to be the one who gets introduced to them. I mean, I feel as much as I've for sure subconsciously sought out all the best teachers. I also had a tremendous amount of luck being at the right place at the right time. Being the only American to train full-time at Langenfeld also helped me to stand out there, because then Sifu Kanchbeck took notice that his American who came all the way from the States to do Wing Chun learned how to speak German pretty quickly by going to Kung Fu class. And I was able to stand out more over there. And so I was able to leverage that. And then when I came back to the States and opened my school, I was able to learn directly from the grandmaster of my lineage. And so that then kind of started it. But I've always been extremely lucky in terms of the people I've been able to meet in Hong Kong and elsewhere. And, I think maybe they read my enthusiasm and they were open with sharing their knowledge with me. So I feel grateful, but I don't know how much of it was just my weird luck and how much of it was just I was always subconsciously working to make sure that I could learn from all the best people.
I mean, they might say it was Yuanfen in Chinese, which is destiny, but
yes.
I think destiny is also a result of sincerity for something that you're pursuing. So maybe that's what stood out, and that manifested your destiny, and that's why the things worked the way they did. So that's great to hear, because I'm sure there's listeners out there that maybe thought in their lifetime that they wanted to do something, or they don't know if they should or they can or they can't, and maybe sometimes they should just go for it and see throw the bones and see where they lie, where they land.
Absolutely.
Your time in the castle, I mean, that sounds really interesting, learning Kung Fu in a castle in Germany. Did you live in the castle?
No. So it's not a huge castle, so it's not like those archetypical medieval castles. It was a much smaller castle, and there were some relatives from it was only like 150 years old, and there were some of the blue bloods like from that line who still lived upstairs, and there were some other businesses in there, but the main wing and the main rooms in there were occupied by the European Wing Chun organization. It was also their headquarters and where they sold their products from, so their office was there. And but we didn't live there. We had to get local accommodations, so which was in a really small town and really nothing to do. The town that I lived in had one bakery and one bank and nothing else. But for someone who is from the East Coast and from New York and spent most of my life growing up, if not in a big city, near a big city, it was a perfect change of pace for me to spend 3 years essentially out in the country with very little distractions, especially as someone who's in their early 20s. It's very easy to get distracted. And I was able to really just focus and go to my training and write notes and practice afterwards and just read about it. And I did nothing but Wing Chun for those 3 years. It was like from morning to night. Even after the 6 hours, I would go home and my training partners, we would talk about what we did. We would recap it. We would practice it. We put helmets on to punch each other in the face. We were so into it. So it was really a 3-year immersive experience for me, and one of the greatest times of my life.
Wow, it sounds like a wonderful time. So there were others that were doing a similar thing. Were they from Germany mostly, or they Europeans, or?
Yeah, so you had, because the castle was also the headquarters for the European Wing Chun organization, you would have all of these instructors within the organization. They would come to the castle, but usually just for a brief amount of time. Like an instructor from Italy might come to the castle to do a couple of weeks of training to get a little tuned up and then go back. So we always had, because of the big association, we had lots of transient Wing Chun people from the association would come for a week or a month or a couple days, maybe to prepare for an exam or to learn their next part of the curriculum. But then you had a small core of people who were there full time. They were mostly Germans who wanted to be instructors, but we had people from Italy, from France, and my closest training partners were 2 guys from Norway. Cool. And so, but for the most part, it was mostly Germans and just a couple foreigners.
And the Norwegians, did they learn German?
Yeah, they learned to speak German, but they spoke perfect English. As most Scandinavians speak extremely good English. So, in fact, when I first met them, I thought they were from California. I didn't even believe that they were from Norway. They had these because they had grown up watching American TV shows, so they had both adopted pretty close to American pitch accents. So, and they lived right next door to me, and we were very close in age. So we would train together at the castle, and afterwards we would, we would write down everything we did and compare notes and stuff. So, yeah, they also learned German. So yeah, it's very
that's
cool.
very cool. Did any of the guys that you spent time with during those days then continue and are continuing running schools in their own countries?
Yes, yeah. So a number of people that I trained with went on to become Wing Chun instructors, either within the association, or some of them even eventually broke away and opened their own associations. And some of them, like, for example, the two Norwegians that I just discussed, neither one of them teaches Wing Chun. So for them, they actually just did it mainly just to do something. They had finished their compulsory military service, and they just wanted to they spent, I think, 2 years at the castle, and I think they did it a little bit more for fun. So everyone did it for different reasons. I think I'm the only one who really took it to the level that I did. Most of the other guys, they maybe just opened smaller schools in small towns, but I'm the guy who went to New York and opened a school. So,
all right, cool.
My whole life is a lie.
Are floppy Chinese swords getting you down? Do you practice traditional Chinese martial arts but have difficulty locating and sourcing firm, solid steel training swords? Well, look no further. Available now on the Mushin Martial Culture online store are high-quality, custom-made, hard steel traditional training swords. Made from the highest quality materials, these swords have both the feel and weight distribution of traditional, authentic Chinese martial arts swords, featuring high-quality scabbards, as well as the option to include a historically accurate handle wrap. This sword is built to last. Head on over to the Mushin Martial Culture online store to order yours today. Available as well on the store are other items, apparel, training shoes, and other unique Chinese martial arts merchandise. The URL is mushinmartialculture.com. Ditch the tin foil and get yourself a sword you can be proud of. You mentioned the head of the organization, Karen Specht, who literally runs one of the biggest martial arts organizations out there. Definitely, there are accomplishments there just on the scale of things that he's managed to build there. And
yes.
And you obviously know him. You knew him. He's passed away.
Yes.
What do you think it was with him that enabled him to build such a big organization? The reason I ask this is because you know what it's like with, never mind Wing Chun politics, but martial arts politics as it is in general. And never mind outside of your school, even within one small group of training brothers under a teacher, there's always going to be some politics that can come in. And he managed to keep it all together and grow to a very large degree. What do you think it was about him that enabled him to do that?
So that's really interesting, because the last time that I really spent time with him, which was in 2023, we went to Hong Kong together. I talked to him about some of this stuff, and he also during the pandemic, he did an audio book, his biography. It's all in German, and I got to listen to that and actually hear about his whole life and how he built it up. And I think that there are a number of factors. And one thing that can't be overlooked is right time and right place. Okay. In the when he started learning Wing Chun from Sifu Alex Richter, it was the mid to late 70s, so it's still well within that big boom from Bruce Lee, the big kung fu boom of the 70s. Germany and Europe in general had very few exotic, what we would consider more exotic martial arts at that time. In Germany in the 70s, you were lucky if you found a karate school and maybe a judo school, and that was it. So now suddenly, Bruce Lee's a big deal, but because Germany doesn't have any Chinese population, especially at that time, I think the only Chinese people in Germany at any given time are university students who are there on an exchange. There's really a very small Asian community, so you didn't have people from Hong Kong who opened a school in Berlin. So suddenly this famous Wing Chun instructor named Leung Ting from Hong Kong comes to Germany, starts teaching my Sifu, and now Wing Chun exists in Germany. So I think that because of the primacy effect, he was the first one, he was the pioneer, and he had a product that everyone wanted, and it was exotic. So, and luckily, the version of Wing Chun through Leung Ting is quite organized. Leung Ting went through great pains to try to avoid some of the problems of codification and programming that some of the other Wing Chun guys have, that we have a loose set list, but like, you know, teaching things in a professional way, step by step, was something that Leung Ting put a lot of effort into. And so he was the first to have a hot product. And he, you know, the product itself was well organized. He was very well organized, and he had a background already teaching martial arts and teaching in the university. So he was already accomplished as a teacher and as an organizer. And it basically just blew up. It was like when something becomes viral, you know, it's not even entirely certain exactly what those factors are, but he was the first. And I think that had a big effect on that. And then luckily some of his early students were also very willing not only to show that Wing Chun was a practical style, but also to grow schools and to teach it professionally. So they had uniforms, they had a curriculum, they had a ranking system, and this allowed them to kind of organize at a much more rapid rate than some of the other more traditional Chinese martial arts, which don't have those things. You know, for better or worse, you know, when you're trying to teach on a large scale, there needs to be some standardization and so on and so forth, and they had that. And so also through the 80s, probably, I don't know, unfortunately, I can't have that conversation with my Sifu anymore, but, you know, Wing Chun and Leung Ting Wing Chun in particular is a very aggressive style. And they did go, and there was some dojo storming in those days, showing up to karate schools and other schools and kind of, you know, having some challenge fights and beating them up with Wing Chun and then bringing them over. So a lot of the first generation of those guys were like karate guys who were converted. Converted being a very loose term. Some maybe were convinced because of books, and some were maybe convinced because someone punched them in the face. But it was a rougher time. And so the EWTO kind of established a little bit of a tough guy reputation, whether deserved or not. And that kind of got it through the 80s and into the 90s before they started to make it a little more, I suppose for lack of a better term, a little bit more corporate and a little bit more for the everyman, where they were no longer focusing on just the fighters. So the success went through phases, you know, first the more traditional fighting phase, and then kind of a more corporate Wing Chun for everyman phase, right? And so that's also part of it as well, that they pivoted to being more professional, I suppose, as it got bigger in the 90s.
Sure. I mean, all of that is relevant, but I would assume that Master Kernsbeck's personality was definitely not a small part. It would have had to have been a large part that kept not just the organization together, but kept students with him, you know, learning from him, and then to grow out from there too.
Yes.
So, I mean, I don't know much about him, so, you know.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely, from an organizational perspective, really was quite phenomenal. And he also divided Germany up into regions. So he would have his top guys in charge of different areas, so that he himself did not have to, monitor everything. But then he would have people who he trusted who were in charge, and then, you know, they would also feel like they had some responsibility and they had some skin in the game. So that would make them more dedicated to making sure that their students did a good job. And, you know, I've talked about it multiple times on the podcast, so I'm not spilling any tea or telling stories out of school here. But Sifu Leung Ting, for all of his innovation as a martial artist and as a Wing Chun person, is a difficult person to run schools under. He can be quite political, and he can also pit some of his own students against each other, and he can be a little Machiavellian in ways we wish he wasn't. And so, if I'm brutally honest here, a big part of my Sifu's success in Europe was that he had the license and the authority to promote Leung Ting's Wing Chun in Europe, but because he had such overwhelming success, he did not have to listen to everything Sifu Leung Ting said as to how to organize it and how to promote it, which meant he was able to do it in a way that he knew would hit in Germany. Because if you allow Sifu Leung Ting to get too involved in the marketing and the ideas, he's going to tell you need to do it the way he did it in Hong Kong in the 1970s, which doesn't work now in the States and didn't work then in Germany. So I think it was to the degree that my Sifu was the representative for Leung Ting Wing Chun in Europe, was also the degree that he had a certain amount of autonomy and power to pay Sifu Leung Ting to keep him off his back while he continued to promote the martial art in a way and organize it in a way that kept it somewhat separate from Sifu Leung Ting's occasional destructive influences.
I see. Well, that makes a lot of sense. But I think a lot of the time you find martial artists and the egos and the personalities and the things like that are actually part and parcel of martial arts. I find it to be more a trait of martial arts than not. For all the talk of ethics and whatever, when you get down to these people on a personal level, all of them have some form of these vices that can either be minimal or kept under control or sometimes run rampant and destroy things. And they might be great martial artists. I mean, that's not to say anything about their martial arts ability. The other side of things is that, a person like your teacher, Mr. Kenspecht, was that obviously there's a level of intelligence there that is not your standard type of intelligence. And I find that those type of people, if they're highly skilled in martial arts and they have a level of intelligence, they generally seem to take the art a lot further than previous generations or other people included would be able to. And these people stand out each generation. They're the reason a lot of the time that an art either makes it into the next generation or doesn't. It's because of not just the efforts in training and teaching, but the intelligence these people had to organize, systemize, and find ways to keep the art growing in a logical way for that time and place. So, these people are rare. So, it's good that he's accomplished all of that. Now that he's passed away, what is the situation with the organization?
I think this is also not unknown to most people, at least to people who listen to my podcast. Although my Sifu was the largest representative of Leung Ting Wing Chun in the States, they effectively stopped having a real relationship at around 2008, 2009. And this was for a number of reasons. One, Sifu Leung Ting had some very public gaffes in the Hong Kong press in terms of his extracurricular behavior, and Sifu Leung Ting had also proven himself to be someone who hindered some of the progress of promoting the art. And so, but Sifu was still loyal to, the man who gave him that kung fu. So since around 2008, 2009, my Sifu basically paid Sifu Leung Ting close to $10,000 a month to effectively leave him alone and let him run his schools. So, even then, Sifu Leung Ting, in many cases, could not leave well enough alone and still meddled, and in that month he wouldn't get his money, right? So, even though my Sifu, you have to imagine to be in such a powerful position financially, but also just I could never imagine being in a position where I have to pay my own Sifu to leave me alone, and then somehow everyone's cool with this arrangement, right? So there's definitely some unique circumstances going on there. Now, after my Sifu passed away, obviously that money is no longer going to be flowing to Hong Kong. Sifu Leung Ting is perhaps not in the best financial situation in terms of his school in Hong Kong. So now he's trying to regroup something in Europe with a lot of the people who have left the EWTO, and he's trying to get people to come to him. So to a certain degree, I should say to a major degree, he wants to destroy the old EWTO and take those students for himself. But his representatives in Europe that are directly under him do not have the organizational skills, the charisma, and the ability to organize like my late Sifu. And Sifu Leung Ting himself is really too old to teach and shouldn't be teaching at this point.
I mean, he's 78. For me, it's kind of surprising that you say this, that he'd even be interested to take on such an endeavor at this age, at this point, Do you
Yeah,
think that?
he's unfortunately in a position where he has to because I left his organization in 2011, and there was a mass exodus of high ranking instructors from his association at a few pivotal moments in his career, and he's basically left, unfortunately, right now, both in Hong Kong and elsewhere, with a lot of yes men who are not really doing a whole lot for him. There are some exceptions. There's some guys here in the States who are still with Sifu Alex, some guys in Illinois who are still, working really hard to, get his name out there, and a couple people here and there. But for the most part, he has what we would call the B team left.
I
And the
see.
B team guys are not the guys who are able to put money in his pocket. And he should be retired now.
I thought he would have been.
Yeah, he
Really?
should be teaching Wing Chun to the highest bidder because he wants to, not because he has to. And
Yeah.
so, unfortunately, he's made some errors and he's mismanaged some steps along the way. And he has to, as I sometimes say, he has to teach Bong Sao for cash now at this point in his life. So it's unfortunate. I wish my, Siva Leungting was also one of my main teachers and mentors for the first 9 years I ran my school. I wish he was in a different position, but he also is in this position because he pushed away a lot of people who really were there for him and could really help him. And he has what he has left over. It's what he has left over.
Yeah, I mean, you say that. Like, I've got my teacher is roughly the same age as him. I think they might even be exactly the same age, roughly the same year. But in contrast, my teacher to one of my martial uncles. So that's somebody who trained under the same Sifu was my teacher under our grandmaster. And what you say, I'm not going to mention names, but what you say here, it resonates with the two differences in personality here. I mean, my teacher at his age now is teaching and training because he loves it. He doesn't have to. He's always had a very open personality, very giving, very kind, and supportive. He wants to pick his students up everywhere in the world to, surpass him. He always says that you must surpass me. But if I contrast that to his martial brother, who has quite a negative personality, and he's always has been a cynical, negative person, I see the fruits of their labor at their ages now, and the one has got students that are like kids to him, an environment of joy when we train and happiness and nothing but love. And another one whose students are far away, and even they themselves look at one another with disdain, and he himself is, constantly complaining about life and all the woes he's had. But at the end of the day, they're self-made woes, to be honest. So, and the right attitude also is really important in martial arts, and it can be very destructive if somebody of a high status like that decides to basically burn the house down, on his way out. It's not good for
Yes.
anybody. It really isn't good
Yes,
for
yeah.
anybody.
Well, everything you said resonates perfectly with my experience, and I think that maybe there are certain archetypes that are just persistent in these martial arts, and it's unfortunate because he gave me, I mean, my entire career is because of Sifu Leungting's work. And I would want nothing more than for him to enjoy the rest of his days and to enjoy retirements and to be surrounded with, students and people who really care for him. But like you said, he's burning the house on the way out, but I feel that he's burning his own house and he's still sitting in it.
Oh, no.
So, it's unfortunate, but we can only control our own actions. We cannot
that's
control
true.
the actions of others. So.
That's true. So we've already hit on a quite a common topic, which is a little bit of the political side of Wing Chun. There's so many lineages. There's so many. Over the years, there's so many offshoots. But in your description, and I know you're on your YouTube channel, one of your discussions was Wing Chun history as a dumpster fire, if I remember correctly, something like that.
Yes.
So let's get into Wing Chun's dumpster fire. Can we discuss the history? I mean, as you've gone throughout the years, when you started off with the Bruce Lee offshoot Wing Chun down to Leung Ting, and then you are an intelligent martial artist. You're somebody who takes great efforts into research and study as well, outside of simply training and training and doing what you were taught. What How has your understanding of Wing Chun history changed over the years? And what are some misconceptions that you think need to be addressed?
That's a great question. It's been a little bit of a fascination of mine for the last couple of years. History in general, and obviously Wing Chun history being a major part of that. As a total aside, I'm a bit of I have a couple side interests outside of martial arts, and one of them is world religions, especially I'm not a religious person by any stretch of the imagination. I'm probably one of the least religious people you could ever meet, but I have an absolute fascination with the history of the Abrahamic religions and how these things spread, how the books were written and all that kind of stuff. And because that is a very hot button topic, because it's people have personal feelings attached to those things.
Yeah.
The historical methods surrounding how to research, like who really wrote books of the Bible and where did this come from and when was it changed, who changed it, like those researchers really have to use the best research methodology available because there are so few records on that stuff. So the way they put it together is really fascinating, and it's extremely robust when they're dealing with only a little bit of information. So now that interest got me interested in how do historians even decide what is fact or what is highly probable versus what's less probable? And how do they even determine? Because it's not like science where you can come up with a hypothesis, you can test it and you can retest it and have the same results. You cannot retest history. So how do these guys really know with any degree of certainty what happened? So I started to read a lot of books on historical methodology, separate because of my interest in world religions. And while I'm reading this, I'm going, I never actually applied any of this to the Wing Chun history. And when I'm reading about the history of, or how historical methods are developed, it looks like everything that we even say about what so-called Wing Chun history or Chinese martial arts history doesn't pass any of these tests. Like not even close. In fact, the fact that most of the history of most Chinese martial arts are told in a fairy tale or in a fictive kind of narrative is a telltale sign that that's in fact not history, because history is not told like there are no good guys and bad guys and this and It's just like, okay, on these dates this happened, this person learned. Like, we don't have any of that. All of our history is essentially taught in the form of narratives and parables and fairy tales. And so already that is like the number one red flag that you're not actually talking about history. Okay, so how do we know what is the actual history of these? Okay, well, you need to have these kind of sources. So I look at what all the talking heads are doing. They don't have any of these sources. And then I go, how do they decide what's fact? These guys are just saying that this is true because they like the Chinese guy who told them that, and they found him very convincing. But that doesn't pass muster in terms of, that would not be accepted by any academic institution as being even remotely relevant. And so because most martial artists and most, in my case, Wing Chun people, don't have any knowledge of how history is actually done, they are, oddly enough, the ones who are the most certain about what it actually is because they heard someone convincingly tell them something. And any historian will tell you that they are not convinced of anything. They can just say, this is most likely what happened, but even that is only to a 60% probability. So they don't speak in terms of absolutes. And all these Wing Chun historians and Chinese martial arts historians, or I should say many of them, not all of them, speak in absolute terms about what's what. And then when you press them, okay, where did you get this? It's from this paper. You look at this paper, clearly this paper is a late forgery or an interpolation or not from that time period. So the more I started to apply actual historical methodology to Chinese martial arts and Wing Chun stuff, the more I realized none of it has passed the test. And in fact, it's very clear that the five elders of Shaolin, the original version of that story is from the Hong Moon Triads, from the anti-Qing government rebels. They created that story, and that story anyone in the triads will tell you is total fake history. It was the oral history to so that they are behind something to fan Cheng Fuk Ming,
Exactly.
overthrow the Qing, replace the Ming. And so these were like historical fairy tales. Now, martial arts people took those fairy tales, changed the name of the five elders to accommodate their styles, and then said their style come from that. So the history of like Moy and the five elders and all that is quite literally a plagiarized story whose source is a fiction.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're not even starting with history here when we're talking about Moy or Wing Chun or any of those narratives. So when we start actually looking to what we know, we see Wing Chun most likely is not as old as we think it is. It's the Wing Chun as we know it with three forms. The three-form structure came in the late 1800s. This is not from the Shaolin Temple, and I think a lot of people don't realize that. But if you tell them that, their Sifu said that their style comes from the Shaolin Temple, that their Sunam Chao form is older than dirt, and how dare you say anything that contradicts what their Sifu says. And their Sifu is just passing on the story they heard from their Sifu. It's not like their Sifu went out and got a degree in history and then went out and did the research and came up with this. They're just telling the story that their Sifu told him. And of course, they're not even necessarily telling it in the exact same way. So
yeah, they're selling it as best as they can remember on a night that you've been drinking too much baijiu together.
Exactly. And clearly adding little, because when we tell stories, whether we're conscious of it or not, it's quite normal. I mean, I try to be cognizant of it, but that we will smooth out the story a little bit to make it sound cooler, right? And then you smooth out a little edge here or you make a connection here, and already it's your own narrative on a story that most likely isn't even true. So the idea that any of these oral histories are even remotely related to reality, I think is just a non-starter. And I think we, as Chinese martial arts practitioners, have to know there's some things we can know. Peter Lorge, who's an actual historian who specializes in Chinese martial arts and Chinese history, I had him on the podcast. There are some things that we can know, but they're very few and far between. And these styles that we now prop up, whether it's Hung Gar, Wing Chun, Choi Lei Fut, are much more recent assemblies than...
Well, that's been my experience too. Like that the barehanded martial arts systems are a much more young thing in the big picture. People want to keep saying things like, no, these come from the battlefield. Just do some research into different dynasties and the armor that these guys were wearing. You're not punching and kicking in. Like in my particular style of Xing Yi Quan, they try to attribute it to periods like the Jin army, for example. They had a soldier called an Iron Pagoda. This dude was armored from head to toe. He was literally a freight train that was coming through armed to the teeth. You're going to punch and kick this guy?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's what a lot of people miss. I mean, when you actually look at the military history of China, it's like, they knew about weapons. They were on horseback. They're not kicking someone in the knee and chain punching them.
Exactly.
And then even the idea that, that these secret martial arts styles were developed to overthrow the Qing government, like in the 1800s, like they have guns and cannons already.
Yeah.
You're going to show up to Beijing with kicks and punches and wooden dummy moves. Like even the narrative itself, if you just look at it, you go, really? These underground militias would most likely be thinking about subterfuge and bombs and storming, the capital with weapons and horseback and small militias, and not going in there with paksao and elbows and
Are you interested in learning authentic traditional Chinese martial arts of Xing Yi Quan and Baguazhang? Well, if that's the case, the Huajin Online Learning Program is for you. The Huajin Online Learning Program is the premier distance learning program where you can learn authentic arts of Hebei Xing Yi Quan and Liang style Baguazhang in a comprehensive and in-depth manner from wherever you are. Featuring over 120 in-depth lessons covering aspects of individual training, technique refinement, forms, application, partner work, conditioning, internal skill building and qigong, and much more. The Huajin online learning program has been running successfully for over 3 years and is highly praised by participants within the program. So start your journey into learning authentic classical Chinese martial arts today by visiting mushinmartialculture.com to find out more, or to sign up directly at patreon.com/mushinmartialculture. That is the Huajin online learning program. Enroll today. Well, we have a record of a group trying to overthrow the Qing, and that's the Taiping Rebellion, which was the bloodiest civil war in Chinese history. And we know how they fought. We knew how they waged war. We knew what they were doing. I mean, they were doing scorched earth. They were doing also, but none of them were doing Taichi. I mean, let's just be clear. You know, they were armed. They were fighting against Manchu soldiers themselves being armed. And this was standard warfare. And we're talking about China, which was literally... If you look at China over the generations, if one thing they were top at, it was cold weapon warfare for a very long time. So you're not going to have a guy that's suddenly going to come barehanded and he's going to go... I mean, the Mongols showed the world what Chinese... Basically, I mean, we're talking about the area. You know, I'm not going to talk about the ethnicity. I'm talking about the area. What Chinese warfare was dealing with. Yeah. And you know, and that they overwhelmed Europe just with their methods, and that was the Yuan dynasty, you know. So at some point we need a bit of logic. Now, that being said, you mentioned certain aspects of the historical method, and the other side of it is just logic. For me, myths and things aside, one of the key things for me that always gives you a hint into the origin of a martial art or a particular system is environment, social situation, and necessity. Those are the three things that would really shape a martial art more than anything else. More than somebody sees a snake and a crane fighting and has an epiphany, or this one sees a jackal mount a hyena and then decides that he's going to create a style out of it. None of that stuff is ever, you know, it never survives the litmus test, and it's always been environment and those three things that I mentioned. It's particularly environment and the situation there.
Yeah, for sure. If you look in Fatzan around the same time, you would find even the other martial arts all had a similar look. Like Wing Chun wasn't the only style that was staying square or doing something that looked like Chi Sao or doing rapid fire strikes. You see that in a whole host of local Hakka area martial arts. So, I mean, the idea that there's a lot of cross-pollination and within the zeitgeist of a certain time period, there are like kind of some ideas and tropes that are being perpetuated. But I think then when these things finally become established and firmed up, then the marketing, I don't mean the marketing like a billboard in Times Square. I mean, then where does your style come from? And then these embellishments about, you know, because whether it's religion, whether it's martial arts, the idea that what we are doing today is tied to a long tradition or a greater cause or something benevolent makes what you do sound just so much more better than just like, yeah, it was probably just a bunch of dudes in the 1800s, like, you know, who had some martial arts training and they came up with some stuff and they taught it to some people and those people taught it to some people, and that's probably why we're here. And then every generation that got it added a little something to the system, improved it, and then probably added 2 more stories to where it actually came from. So, I mean, just think, you were talking about the snake and the crane, and I think one of my favorite of those origin stories was in Dai Sing Pekwa and the Monkey Kung Fu, that, you know, the founder, Cao Zi, was in jail, and he looked out his window and he saw a monkey pick up a bottle of wine and drink and then stumble, and then came up with the idea of drunken monkey from that. So, I mean, like, the story, like, just the way that story is told is not told in any way that an actual historical record would be told. It's a story, and that's a red flag.
And also, I mean, as you mentioned, if you look at historians and you're talking about religion, you know, one of the key things that they use is multiple sources over a large area saying a similar thing or overlapping things. And if you have one source with one story that it all disseminates from, you can probably be sure that it's not accurate.
Yes,
So,
exactly. Not to mention that, Wing Chun is not the only style that claims to have come from these five elders who escaped the burning Shaolin temple.
of which
Most of
there are
those
no
southern
government records for ever happening. So
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
that
And then,
problem too.
and all of them conveniently went out and taught these different streams of they all came from the same temple, but somehow they did five different martial arts. And
Yeah,
I mean, it's this tying it to something larger that I think is very common. I mean, making those connections is, especially for the Chinese, is very important
very
because
important.
the longer the history is behind it. This is why even in modern Wing Chun history, let's say in the 20th century, there are many Sifus that came up with their own innovations in terms of the technique, but because this is not how their Sifu showed it, sometimes they won't tell their students that, oh, actually, this is my idea based on my experience. They will either not say anything at all, or they will claim sometimes, oh, actually, Sifu showed me this once, because even when they're applying their own, you know, innate ability to use critical thinking and they come up with something that they feel is an improvement, there is this extra layer of Chinese culture which says, yeah,
Exactly.
but now you cannot add it because now you've changed something. And those things always get added in. I mean, every instructor who teaches any martial art has no matter how traditional they claim to be, just by the way they teach it, it's already different from their teacher. And many times when they come up with their own innovations in the teaching system or in the art itself, they will just, it's a sin of omission. They don't say that it didn't come from their Sifu, but they didn't say that it did. They just kind of don't say anything. And that's how it goes, because they don't want to be the one who changed something and then gets pointed on by the other Kung Fu brothers and sisters of being not traditional. And we say in Chinese, Yako Sifu, Yako Chun Sao. For every Sifu, there's another method,
Yeah, exactly.
but it's saying the quiet part out loud.
Well, I mean, you also touched on the Chinese culture, the face, the way that things are done there. That's the other reason why when even somebody hearing a fable or a tale of the origin of a style and realizing while he's listening to it that there's problems, there's holes in that story, or it's just contradictory to other history, etc. If it's a senior person saying it, the junior person just wouldn't ever challenge him on it, or even probe. I mean, we don't even have to say challenge like saying, oh, you're wrong about this, but just probe into it to have a discussion. That won't happen. And then one generation next, or even the rest of the people in that room repeat what they've been told.
Absolutely.
Now, that being said, what through your time and your research what do you think is a more reputable story of Wing Chun's development?
The larger your island of knowledge grows, the bigger the shoreline of your ignorance. So
Yeah.
the more I learn, the less certain I am about anything, actually. I have way less certainty about anything regarding the history of Wing Chun now compared to 15 years ago, where I would have said, yeah, the fable is probably not true, but like it was probably developed by, anti-Qing fighters, yada, yada, yada. And I would have left it at that because I'm more focused for the most part on teaching the martial art, right? But the problem is that now with the internet, you have a lot of Wing Chun people claiming to teach some older derivatives or some,
Lost version.
Yeah, lost versions, the real version, the original version, and the evidence for that is paper thin. That this is actually as promised, and any martial art can be developed in any time period. I mean, it might look old, but how do I know you guys didn't? It's not a composite style from 10 years ago that you now just said came out, right? It's very easy knowing what we know to retroactively. You can always fit in prophecies once you know the prophecy, right? So it's a bit of an issue. I believe that Wing Chun, like the name Wing Chun, and what we really understand as the Wing Chun art nowadays with the three forms of the wooden dummy, the weapons, that form of kind of what we would like, if you could go back in time, how far can you go back in time and still recognize the art as Wing Chun? Because it certainly didn't pop up out of nowhere. It's like evolution. Exactly. It's a slow change over time. So just like the English language, I saw a video the other day. How far could an American go back in time and still be understood in America, like to, for 1700s, 1600s? Turns out it's actually not that far back, because English has changed quite a bit in that short period of time, and the usage and phrases have changed immensely. So for me, I think that it's like probably been around for a while, but it's just been this evolution that branched off into other styles and then eventually became more formalized. But it's only one stream of a bunch of potential martial arts. I think that to go back in time and say, okay, this looks like Wing Chun, you have the Sunam Tao Chum Kibuji dummy, maybe some weapons or something, I think we're really looking at the late 1800s. And that's not to say that Wing Chun was developed then. What became Wing Chun, or what might have been called Wing Chun, most likely existed before that. But we already know that Leung Chan was Yip Man Sigong, the teacher of his teacher. He didn't have Sunam Tao Cham Ki Buji when he taught Wing Chun. So somewhere in between Leung Chan, the Kung Fu king of Wing Chun, and 2 generations later, Yip Man, they're now 3 forms, a formalized dummy set, and all these weapons.
Right.
So that is from the late 1800s. Like, the Wing Chun as we know it, right? That's not to say that Wing Chun didn't exist in another form. So, and that's all I can say. And even that, I'm like 70% on. And if someone presents me with compelling evidence that that is completely wrong and it's actually something else, I'll be the first one to change my mind on it, because I don't base my living on being a historian. So, but having learned a little bit about it, I think that the responsible thing for non-historians to do is to speak with a lot less certainty about this.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
And what about the name? Any idea the naming? I mean, myth aside, female student aside, and her name. Where do you think this name came from?
Well, I think this, depending on who you ask, this can be a real hot button topic, because again, much like religion, when you question someone's story or history, for you, it might be a factual endeavor. Like, I want to know what's actually what. I want to hear it in a non-emotional kind of way. But when you question someone on these things, they don't hear that. They hear an attack on their identity because it's their style, which is so part of their identity, right? I realized a long time ago I need to stop doing that, because why is my identity wrapped up in fairy tale myths about the style? It doesn't change what I teach on the floor day to day, where Wing Chun came from, right? But with the name Wing Chun, I mean, you ask a certain group, they're going to say it's inconclusive. You ask another group, they're going to say, no, I know exactly what. And that certainty I'm always suspicious of. There's another style of Kung Fu called Wing Chun. It's a slightly different character with a slightly different tone. Our is in Cantonese a 6-tone Wing Chun. There's another one's a 5-tone Wing Chun. Very, very close. And even to the Cantonese ear, there's not really much difference. That is the eternal spring. And the one we do, the wing means like to chant or to praise. Now, there's another style called eternal spring, which has a lot. It would seem like some of the DNA of our style is in that style. You see some movement patterns and some, for sure they may have shared a common ancestor, and the name is very similar. Mm-hmm. So if you ask those people, we're just copying them, and we copied their homework and changed it a little bit, right? But if you ask other people, you can see, well, the differences between the two styles is vast enough that this split most likely happens much earlier and not more recently. So again, with that, we really don't know. There is, it could be to harken back to the mythical story. Like they may have chose for the real name of the style, they may still have opted to use something mythical, because for, when the Qing took over China, this was not only a huge insult for China because of having a new regime, but also because these were people who are not ethnically Chinese.
Yeah, they were Manchus.
They were Manchu, and now, the Manchus are forcing Chinese men to shave the front of their head in a way that's not a traditional Chinese hairstyle, while not forcing the women to do anything. They wanted to subjugate the men. It was psychological. So they were very oppressed, and they hated this government. And then they saw the previous regime, the Ming Dynasty, through rose-colored glasses. And we all know that the last part of the Ming Dynasty was no picnic
corruption
and rampant corruption, right? Okay, but now, because they're foreigners taking hold of us, we are seeing the pass through rose-colored glasses, and now we want to restore the Ming. So they considered, there's one hearsay that the Ming, autumn, springtime, rebirth. The Chinese New Year's in the springtime, right? So they believe that this rebirth is in spring. So to praise spring is to praise the potential rebirth, which is maybe another way to talk about overthrowing the Qing. So there may be something like that in there. And but again, it might also just be nonsense. Okay, right. So I really don't know. There are people who will say for certain, but I think to the degree that they're certain is to the degree I think they would actually be wrong. And I think that unfortunately, because of a lack of written records or verifiable written records, most Chinese martial arts Sifus, at least in the South, many of them were illiterate. Another thing that historical methodology teaches us is that universal literacy, which is something that we take for granted in the modern age, was not a feature of society for most of the history of people. All right. There was a class of people who knew how to read and write, and those were not the common folk. So a lot of people who taught martial arts and passed these martial arts on may not have actually been literate, so could not have written it down even if they wanted to. So without any of this stuff, we really don't know anything. Yeah, and I think that people have to start to become comfortable with that. There are a lot more unknowns, and there are a lot more things that may, as with the passage of time, become unknowable. And we just have to accept that. All right. It doesn't mean that we're not going to look for something, but I think that, we even in recent history, we even have these kind of issues. The Kennedy assassination. All right. That was on camera, and people cannot even agree what happened. Now we're going to talk about stuff with no records when we can't even agree on stuff that we can see with our own eyes. Yeah. So I think as much as I love the topic and I would love to know, I think at some point we're just going to have to go, we just don't have it, and we're just going to have to move on.
If you enjoy the Drunken Boxing podcast, as well as all the other Mushin martial culture endeavors, please do support us if you can at patreon.com. We have 2 support tiers there that you can pledge to help us continue to do the work that we do and continue to bring you the podcast as well as all our other works. If you would like to make a once-off tip or donation to our endeavors, please visit the link listed in the show notes or scan the QR code here. Thank you to everyone who supports us. I have the same problems with my style simply because of the illiteracy of the previous generations and only a few sparse records here and there, and even those sometimes conflict one another and they don't set out a clear story either. We can only know as much as we're able to know, and that's about it. Yes. And we have to accept that and understand the art has been handed down. Maybe it is meant to be a living thing that gets handed down without being crystallized in a written form. It's supposed to be a living thing that is constantly big. Its evolution is going through us each generation, and the key is to keep handing that down. Absolutely. As opposed to anything else. I do want to touch one last topic. I know we said we've got a time limit, but one small topic which I don't know if you've ever researched into it. Just across in southern China, Foshan, the areas I've seen in the last few years people that I've known that have gone down there, and I've even seen some of the stuff that they presented. A couple of lineages that say no, this their Wing Chun has stuff that Yip Man didn't take down to Hong Kong. They have ideas of more weapons, broadswords, lion dancing, etc., saying that this was all part of the bigger system of Wing Chun. And even, if I recall correctly, saying like Sunim Tao, which Tao is in Mandarin, the last word being head, they'd even say, well, that's only the first part of the form. There's also a Wei, the tail, the end part of the form, etc., etc. I don't know if you've seen or heard of any of this.
Yes, I mean, if you're a Yip Man Wing Chun practitioner and you have any ear for this kind of stuff, this is the first thing, because, of course, Yip Man left China. He came to Hong Kong and he made it big. And obviously a big part of that success was the fact that Bruce Lee was one of his students and went up to become one of the biggest stars. So Yip Man Wing Chun has always gotten all the shine and all the spotlight. But quite honestly, it's not the only lineage of Wing Chun. And Yip Man wasn't even necessarily like the banner holder for his own specific lineage of Wing Chun. He was just a very accomplished and enthusiastic practitioner of the school of Wing Chun that he came from, right? So the first thing you're going to hear from all these guys from Fatzan or Foshan in Mandarin is, because of course the stuff that gets popular elsewhere is always watered down. Yeah, it's what the casuals like, blah, 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 blah. But the real thing, we have this, we have this, we have this. And for me, this is like, again, reverse engineering the prophecy, all right? It's very easy to create kung fu forms, okay? Especially if you have a knowledge of martial arts. So it's very easy to create something, if you understand how Wing Chun works, to create expansions on the Siunam Tao form, to create expansions on any form, to add an extra. I could, if you gave me 5 minutes, I could create a new set on the wooden dummy with unique movements and some movements from other sets, but put together in a way that's not like the other sets. It's not that difficult if you've been doing this for a while. So it's very easy to say, this doesn't have this doesn't have this, and doesn't have lion dancing, doesn't have all of these traditional trappings of martial arts. And that may well be true. But the problem is then they're also defining what Wing Chun means, all right? If Wing Chun is a practical style that can be taught using these methods to fight against other styles of other martial arts, then that's what Wing Chun is. It's not the conglomeration of 3 different knife forms and a lion dancing set and all of that, because that doesn't necessarily... Yeah, that doesn't necessarily achieve the aim. I always like, although I'm not a huge fan of the movie Grandmaster, it's another movie about Wing Chun, and I like Tony Leung, and I'm a huge Wong Kar-wai fan, but it probably takes the most creative license with Yip Man's story. But Tony Leung did have like a very cool line when he came to Hong Kong. No one had heard of Wing Chun before, and they're like, well, you don't have lion dancing, you don't have these kind of demonstrations, you don't do this, you don't do that, like listing off all the things that the other traditional guys have. And then he was like, no, Wing Chun is for fighting. It's not a performance. Right. And I appreciate that. And Yip Man in particular seems to be very pragmatic, very practical. So even if the style did have those elements, he may have taken it out because he didn't see it as necessary for the aims of Wing Chun. So I think they may be speaking the truth about Wing Chun potentially having all this other stuff. But I also highly suspect that these are later interpolations.
I think you've hit the nail on the head, because, I mean, I didn't want to say what I'd seen. I'd seen a lot of the content that they said was excluded, etc. And you kind of, being, experienced, you have an eye to see, like, sorry, that structure of what you've just shown me there has modern trappings included in there.
Yes.
So it's definitely, backwards. They've added that stuff later. I don't want to say I know without a doubt, but my personal experience from what I've seen, it was added later. It was definitely a more recent addition. And that's fine. Maybe they're trying to market themselves or whatever, but, it's just, it's a bit sad that you do that. And if you're knowingly doing that, saying otherwise,
Yes,
so.
Absolutely.
Well, it's been a great chat. I don't want to keep your whole day tied up with this. I definitely might, if you're willing, might want to do this again. Possibly, I had a plan to do a couple of Wing Chun guests, and then maybe have a couple of you on together to talk about Wing Chun specific topics at some point.
Sure.
I'm not a Wing Chun practitioner, but I find all Chinese martial arts and martial arts in general fascinating. I've always read, looked. I mean, you mentioned your initial teacher, Leung Ting, and I remember buying his books as a kid and reading things there too, and always being fascinated. So to hear and learn more from practitioners such as yourself is always a treat for me.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I had a very good time. I also appreciate your insights as well. I think if we ever have a chance to meet face to face, I'm sure we can have a very long conversation about a wide variety of topics.
I'm sure we will, and hopefully that'll happen one day.
Absolutely.
I'm going to get your contact details. I know most of them in any case, but I'll get everything and put them in the show description, etc. for the listeners if they want to reach out. They want to go to your YouTube channel, go to the Kung Fu Genius. It's a great channel. There's podcasts, there's discussions, there's all sorts of things there that are very interesting for lunatics such as myself. So, but we'll put all of that in there for that. If
Awesome.
there's any other ways that you want to add out there, then I'll put it in there and I'll get it from you later.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. That works fine. I would definitely do this again anytime. I quite enjoyed this.
All right, great. The pleasure was all mine. You have a good day, and we'll be in touch.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Take care. Bye-bye.